Marriage really is standing buck naked in front of your partner, warts and all, and going...
Bond that seemed to defy Hollywood's chaos. A partnership built on laughter, devotion, and an almost spiritual sense of unity. But behind the smiles and the red carpet affection was a reality only two people knew how to carry. And for years, Deborra-Lee Furness carried more of it than she ever let the world see, and now, for the first time, she reveals the heartbreaking truth behind her divorce from Hugh Jackman. A truth that didn't begin with fame or failure, but with a slow, quiet unraveling that neither of them could stop no matter how desperately they held on. When they met on the set of Corelli, everything felt effortless, like destiny had placed them in the same room and simply stepped aside, letting two souls find each other in the noise of an industry that devours love stories for sport. And from the very beginning, Deborah was Hugh's anchor, his guide, the steady hand that shaped his path long before Wolverine sharpened his claws or the world fell in love with his charm, and Hugh, in return, became the gentle force that lifted her through heartbreaks, losses, and the exhausting weight of a public who never fully embraced her the way they embraced him. For decades, they moved like a unit, supporting each other through fertility struggles, personal tragedies, relentless headlines, and the immense pressure of raising a family under the harsh glow of international fame. But even the strongest partnerships can fracture in silence. Even the most loving hearts can drift apart without ever meaning to. And that is where their story takes a devastating turn. A turn Deborah has finally chosen to speak about. She describes the first signs not as conflict, not as arguments, not even as distance, but as tiny moments of emotional misalignment, moments where she felt herself fading into the background of a life built for two, where Hugh's growing global identity began to stretch beyond the borders of the life they once shaped together, not out of betrayal, but out of evolution, the kind that can leave a partner feeling like a chapter rather than a co-author. As Hugh's career soared into international superstardom, Deborah's identity became increasingly overshadowed, not by his ambition, but by the world's obsession with him, and she reveals that the hardest part wasn't the fame itself, but the way it slowly shifted the balance of their relationship, turning her from the woman beside him into the woman behind him, the one always expected to understand, to adjust, to be endlessly supportive even when her own desires and dreams were quietly collapsing. She speaks of nights when she waited for him to come home from filming, emotionally drained but still smiling, still believing, still hoping that the next chapter would bring them back into sync, and she admits that Hugh tried, truly tried, to keep the connection alive, to remain present, to stay rooted in the marriage that shaped him into the man he became. But the pace of their lives, the competing worlds they both inhabited, and the emotional distance that crept in over time created a tension neither wanted to acknowledge publicly. Deborah reveals that the decision to divorce didn't come from anger, but from grief, a grief she carried long before the world knew anything was happening, a grief born from waking up next to someone she loved deeply but no longer recognized in the way she once did. Not because he changed into someone unkind, but because he changed into someone she could no longer reach in the way she used to. She confesses that she began to feel invisible, as though her role in Hugh's narrative had become symbolic instead of intimate, respected instead of understood, honored instead of genuinely lived, and that this emotional invisibility was more painful than any argument or mistake could ever be. She talks about the pressure of being the older partner in a world obsessed with youth, a world that scrutinized her appearance, her choices, her worthiness, forcing her into a battle she never asked for. And she admits that the quiet insecurity woven into those criticisms stayed with her longer than she wanted to admit, whispering doubts into moments that were supposed to feel secure. And through all of this, she still loved him, still admired him, still wanted the best for him, but she could feel them drifting into two separate worlds, held together by habit, respect, and history rather than the emotional intimacy that once made them inseparable. The heartbreaking truth, she says, is not that they stopped loving each other, but that they stopped growing in the same direction. She reveals that they spent years trying to fix it, attending therapy, taking breaks, adjusting schedules, making promises, breaking them, rebuilding them, doing everything they could to salvage what remained. But the harder they tried to force the connection, the more fragile it became, until it reached a point where holding on felt more painful than letting go. She describes the day they finally decided to divorce, not as an explosion, but as a quiet collapse. Two people sitting together in a room, acknowledging the truth neither of them wanted to face, tears falling not from anger, but from a shared sorrow that the life they built, a life so few marriages ever achieve, had finally reached its end. Deborah reveals that announcing their separation was the second heartbreak because the world's reaction didn't offer empathy, it offered speculation, judgment, conspiracy theories, and headlines that treated their lived pain like entertainment. And she admits that the cruelty of those comments nearly broke her all over again. She speaks of waking up to messages questioning her worth, her place in Hugh's life, her identity, her image, and how those words reopened wounds she fought for years to heal, reminding her of the criticism she endured from the very beginning of their relationship. But she also shares that in the aftermath, in the silence after the headlines faded, she found something she didn't expect herself. The version of Deborah who existed before the cameras, before the red carpets, before the world started seeing her only as Hugh Jackman's wife. She reveals that the divorce, as heartbreaking as it was, gave her permission to breathe again, to rediscover the dreams she put aside, to reclaim the parts of her identity swallowed by the endless demands of fame and partnership. She says she learned that love can succeed even when marriage fails, that good people can outgrow each other without becoming enemies, and that choosing oneself is not a betrayal, but a necessary act of survival. She admits she still loves Hugh, not as a husband, not as a partner, but as the man who shared nearly 3 decades of her life, the father of her children, the soul she once walked beside, and the friend she hopes to keep long after the wounds have healed. And then she unveils the final heartbreaking truth, that sometimes the strongest marriages are the ones that end quietly, not because they failed, but because they fulfilled their purpose, because they carried 2 people through the seasons they were meant to share, and because letting go with dignity is the most loving act remaining when the future no longer fits 2. She ends her revelation with a message to anyone watching, anyone listening, anyone grieving the end of something they thought would last forever, that there is life after the loss of a dream, peace after the end of a chapter, and strength in choosing to rewrite one's story even when the world is watching. And that is the truth Deborra-Lee Furness reveals at last, the intimate, painful, human truth behind her divorce from Hugh Jackman. Not a story of scandal, but a story of hearts that loved deeply, drifted slowly, and finally set each other free. Remember to subscribe for more stories like this.